So part of my research is about saying, hey, we weren't primitive imbeciles, we actually had extraordinary sciences that sustained very complex food systems, and we did it on purpose. Sometimes scientists will be like, oh, well, they didn't really know they were doing all this. They just accidentally were doing it.
Welcome back to Our Present Future, Explorations in Regeneration. This episode is with Lyla June. Lyla is a poet, singer, and author who weaves together her experience and wisdom as a Diné woman along with her studies of anthropology, human ecology, Indigenous pedagogy, and her PhD work focused on pre-colonial Indigenous land management and food systems. Lyla is a passionate and dedicated communicator working in service for humanity to reconnect with our place as a part of nature. In this conversation, we explore the tensions between worldviews that commonly arise when discussing our predicament. We discuss some of the key insights of Lyla's research and how they are being received by others. If you have not yet seen Lyla's TED Talk, I highly recommend it for additional context to this conversation. And I will link to that talk as well as several other great references to learn more about Lyla and her work in the description. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Lyla June. Welcome, Lyla. Thank you very much for joining me. It's a great pleasure to sit down and speak with you, and I'm been a big fan and really fascinated to learn about your research with Indigenous land management and food systems and a number of other topics I know you're deeply involved in. But to start, I wanted to ask if you would just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So at Eshik Auto should the managed Ejitratini Ishla. That's special in a shin hidishite. Auto Bilagane the Chanel. South New Mexico Dana. Aquat ego the ne Aspanishla. So my name is Lyla June, and I'm from the Nanish clan of the Diné Nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo, um, commonly incorrectly known as Navajo. And as the Diné Nation, we are indigenous to what is now called New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. Um, that's my number one identity, is that we get our clans from our mothers. So we get our last names from our mothers, not our fathers. So Nanish is really what and who I am from a Dene lens. Um, my father's mother is of Southern Cheyenne descent. My mother's father is the Salt clan of the Dene, and my father's father is of the Scottish clans, other European clans, and things like that. So, kind of a hybrid of things, like most of us these days, like many of us, I should say. Um, So yeah, I'm a musician, uh, sort of accidentally. I just started making music, and a couple of things got out there, and so I travel a lot to music festivals and other music poetry events. I just finished the PhD. I did all the all the Western education stuff, the bachelor's degree, master's, blah blah blah, and studied anthropology, studied education for Native youth. And most recently, the doctoral dissertation is on native land management techniques, pre-colonial native land management techniques, um, and their corresponding food systems. And yeah, no, I'm just very happy to be here. And I think of all the hats I wear, I just want to be a servant of the creator and a servant of the community. That's really my vocation when you strip it all down. I'm just a servant or aspiring servant.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Actually, a question I was going to ask you a little later, but now it feels like the most, like the best time. Can you share what is the first laughter ceremony and describe the meaning of Honjon?
You know, you do have to be careful sharing about ceremonies on a public platform like this, which is a good teaching in and of itself, you know. A lot of Native folks where we have these ceremonies, you know, and they are sacred. And and when you mix it with podcasts and TV and um, YouTube and stuff, it becomes a whole other thing. You know, you have to be very, very careful if you share, if at all. A lot of, like, for instance, a lot of our ceremonies, we prefer not to. In fact, we kind of, it's pretty strict rule, no cameras, no videography, because the ceremony itself is so sacred. We don't want to be not present for it, taking a picture. And it's not really for that purpose. It's not for the purpose of showing the world somewhere else. It's for that moment. And interestingly, a lot of Indigenous teachings are only passed down orally from person to person, or from an elder to the people, through practice. So a lot of these ceremonies, for better or worse, are not available on Google. They're not available anywhere on the internet. They can literally only be learned in person in the moment. So it's pretty interesting if you think about it, because on one hand, we have all these endangered languages, endangered ceremonies that are, you know, at the risk of being lost. And so it would be good to record them in a way. It would be good to have some sort of record of them. But on the other hand, it goes against our cultural protocols. Um, so the first laughter ceremony is not I wouldn't say it's like on the level of, like, I don't know, some really more esoteric knowledges. So I think I can describe it sort of cursorily, or like an overview. Um, but yeah, so Diné people, they actually uh, honor the first laugh of a child. So when a child laughs, they have a big ceremony, which I probably shouldn't go into the details too deep, but it involves the child giving salt, you know, to those around him or her or them, and sort of giving this give, even though they're like too young to really hold the basket of salt. They're usually, like, you know, a few months old. They're participating in a ceremony of giving. So yeah, they give salt to the people at the ceremony, and that's good because, you know, you're teaching joy very young. You're honoring laughter, you know. To us, a laughter is, to a lot of things, to Diné people, is not just humdrum, oh, there's laughter, whatever, we take it for granted. We're like, holy crap, what is laughter? You know, what is this? You know, what did the Diné make? What did the holy people make this laughter thing for? I feel like a lot of the beauty of Diné culture is that we stop and question and observe and honor even the most simple things, and unpack them and be like, wow, this is not simple, this is sacred. Um, so teaching the child joy, you know, and even having a whole ceremony, a whole big, you know, event in the child's life, it's one of the major milestones of a person's development in our culture. Um, you know, it's just part of our way of explaining what is valuable. Um, to us, joy is valuable, you know, which I think in most cultures they would say that, but in American culture, it's not super high priority. Like, there's other priorities, like winning and conquering and getting, and having, you know, those things are probably valued more than being in a state of joy. Um, in theory, those things lead to joy, but oftentimes we postpone joy, uh, f- for the sake of these other means of getting to joy. So anyways, that's that. And then Hojo is, you know, a word, a very famous Diné word that we've shared with the world. It's a concept. It means beauty, but it also means something like joy, the connection to the beauty of creation, to be in alignment and participatory within the process of life. Everything from breathing, everything from hearing a bird, everything from seeing the blue sky, everything from uh, planting the corn seeds, everything from observing the different uh, animals. Like those things are to us. It's hojo. It's being a part of beauty. It's being a part of and the joy of being a part of beauty. And so, I mean, I think again, that's one thing Diné people can contribute to the world is like stopping and acknowledging the wonder of creation. That's one of our strengths is to just to just honor the miracle and the beauty and the joy. Um, and that requires a bit of slowing down. That requires a bit of being grateful, not taking things for granted. That requires examination. Examine the sky, examine the way the sky changes throughout the day, examine what the dawn light looks like, examine what the dusk light, those dusk and dawn are very important to us. And so those two times of day are observed very keenly. And well, you pray during those times with various corn things. But um, to really examine the details of wonder, uh, and the details of the magic of this world. So that's the best I could explain it.
That's great. Thank you. And I think what led me to ask that and my curiosity and my interest or my concern for sort of the collective culture is the roots of the worldview and how I'm sure this relates to your research and your work on food systems and land management is that at some point it's going to confront other worldviews. And what you've just shared on this meaning of Honjon and this beauty and participation in the mystery and all of the fantastic parts of life that I don't think there is an equivalent to what you've shared about the laughing ceremony. It's certainly not how I grew up. I mean, I had a very loving family and we celebrated joy, but it wasn't encapsulated in it wasn't held in its own unique container for honoring your relationship with life. And somehow I feel like that, maybe there are others, but it seems like a very good one. Just this love for life and this love for the participation in life. We need more invitations into that worldview um, to help make progress into these bigger problems or bigger challenges that we face, and there's no shortage of those in terms of water, food, security, our relationships with each other, all of these things. So, yeah, I just admire that, and it's thank you for sharing. It's very encouraging to know that uh, exists and is carried forward.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. So I'm curious to get into sort of the next steps of how your research is being received. But before jumping ahead, just for the conversation, can you give a brief overview of what you've been studying in terms of land management and food systems and sort of the main themes there, and then we can move forward from there.
Yeah, it started out with an elder telling me, we used to manage this continent extensively. We densely populated the continent. He said our foods were smaller, but they were more nutrient dense, still are in many places. And he was saying that the notion that this continent was isolated before Columbus is also false. Everyone and their mom was here before Columbus. The notion that we just got here with the Bering Strait is false, which turns out we've been unequivocally disproven that, which is fun. Um, and just really beckoning me to shatter these myths that are so politically charged, because if Native people didn't, manage the land, didn't cultivate certain species, didn't manage chestnut groves, didn't manage oyster estuaries, didn't manage abalone farms, if we didn't work with soil management and creating topsoils purposefully, if we didn't purposefully augment, buffalo habitat with our fire and all these incredible technologies, ecological technologies that we had in practice. If we didn't do all that, then it's easier for the colonizer to say, oh, nothing much was happening here before we got here, and everything was terra nullius, everything was virgin land, everything was wilderness. Um, you know, so we didn't really destroy anything because there was nothing here. And it sort of sanitizes the consciousness of colonial society. Like, okay, we didn't murder anything because there was nothing here. There weren't even that many people here, just a few Indians running around. When in actuality, there was massive civilizations here doing incredible work. Um, and not only that, but by their own rules and by their own laws back in the day, um, if you could only own land if you used it. It was like ownership by use because they knew private property didn't make sense. John Locke, Thomas More, the Romans, they were trying to fantasize this notion of private property. So they said, well, everything belongs to God because they were all, Thomas More and John Locke were Christians back then. So they knew everything belonged to God, but they said, well, the labor of a man belongs to himself. So if he labors on a land, then it becomes his through his own labor. And I can hear stuff in the background. Maybe you could mute while I'm speaking. But there you go. Cool. Yeah, so as soon as a person would labor on the land, such as till a field or whatever, it by their theory, by their legal rationale, it became theirs. So when they came here and they saw Native people using all this land, and cultivating and laboring on it and shaping it by their own rules, this was our land. And so it made it even more challenging to say, oh, this is a vast empty space ready for ready for someone to just claim it, and these Indians aren't even using it, that you hear, it must sound crazy, but they literally would write this down. They waste the land. They don't use the land. Let's put it into proper hands that will use it properly. So we have to understand that back in the day, there was a huge incentive to diminish and erase the ways in which Native people would cultivate the land. It was really important actually to colonial society to to ignore, minimize, even destroy evidence of indigenous land management. But even still, they couldn't fully ignore it because it was so obvious. So you also see in the journals of diaries of different, colonial people of just saying, oh, the Indians are burning the forest again. They're not the forest, but burning the understory of the forest again. They're creating these meadows and these pastures again. They're using their fire. Oh, the Indians are, taking care of this amazing fishery. They have these amazing, there's even drawings of like these fish weirs and it's like huge, estuarian infrastructures. So even though there was an incentive to diminish it, a few things squeaked by, and we have some written records of really extraordinary food systems and land management. But in addition to that, we have archaeological records, and those are sometimes the most uh, convincing, right? Of like, oh wow, people harvested oysters out of the Chesapeake Bay for over 3,000 years without fail, without end, without any pauses in the archaeological record. And America has destroyed the oyster population in the Chesapeake Bay, less than 1% of its original size in less than 300 years. Those statistics are hard to ignore, or we find chestnut pollen in the record alongside fossilized charcoal pollen, coming up at the same time and staying together at the same time, indicating that native peoples manage these chestnut groves with routine fire, to burn away the competing vegetation and really select for these gigantic chestnut trees that fed the whole population. So so part of my research is about saying, hey, we weren't primitive imbeciles, we actually had extraordinary sciences that sustained very complex food systems, and we did it on purpose. Sometimes scientists will be like, oh, well, they didn't really know they were doing all this. They just accidentally were doing it, um, so there's that. There's also acknowledging that we had an impact on the land. We created the land that America loves so much, the topsoils that were used, to create what eventually became the Dust Bowl, all those topsoils that they tilled up, those were anthropogenic soils. Those were created by millennia of routine burning. And looking at our lunar calendars, the September moon is called the grass burning moon for a lot of tribes. And so just burning the grasses every September, burning the prairies, actually gives life to the prairies counterintuitively, because it brings that ash into the soil. And from that charred, that blackened prairie, you have all kinds of nutrient dense grasses, pyroadapted medicines like echinacea, popping up in the wake of those fires. So on one hand, it's about, proving, correcting the record of how awesome Native people were. On the other hand, it's about unearthing these strategies that worked back then and arguably should work today. So really giving us technologies that we could use to create sustainable food systems today. But also, to your point, it's not enough to just mimic the practices. We have to learn the worldview, the invisible principles, the invisible assumptions, the invisible ideas, the invisible intention, that people had when they were creating these systems, which almost universally were about reciprocity, reverence, respect, being in service to nature rather than being the master of nature, giving to these animals, or even the notion that animals are equal to or greater than humans, that we are animals, too. Why would we be better? Why are we in the center of creation? Like, just because we are, and reframing, like, maybe God didn't give us these big brains because he endowed us to be the rulers of creation, but rather maybe the creator endowed us with these big brains so that we could be better servants, better groundskeepers, better landscapers, better healers, better facilitators of life. And we can do things, no one else can burn the prairies like us. Uh, on the other hand, birds can do stuff that we can't do. Everyone has their own ecological role. Um, so really not just tapping into the practices, but tapping into the worldview, tapping into the principles, the values of that culture. Those also need to be adopted by the world in general. And maybe that sounds obvious that we should be respectful, but you'd be surprised how unimportant respect is in a lot of societies when it comes to how we treat the earth. Um, and so really highlighting that for the world, saying, look, it's our value system that's broken. And until we heal that root, which then determines what our goals are, right? Our values determine our goals. If our value is profit maximization and self-aggrandizement, then our goal is to be a YouTube star and to have a profitable business, right? If those are our values, our goals will then follow suit. And then our strategies will then follow that. And then our society will reflect those strategies. And so, but it's all starting with the values. So if we don't fix that rudder of the boat of our society to be more healthy, to be more dignified, if you will, more civilized, to use the colonial term, to be more, about respect, reverence, responsibility to homeland, reciprocity, and restraint, then we're never gonna our physical reality is going to continue to reflect our invisible values. Um, and until we work on that, which involves a lot of healing, a lot of understanding, a lot of grieving, a lot of faith, letting go of control, letting go of our insecurities, you know, then we're not going to see a different society. So that's sort of the research in a nutshell. Sorry, that was a bit rambly, but yeah, I think the dissertation is called Architects of Abundance: Indigenous Regenerative Food and Land Management Systems and the Excavation of Hidden History. So it's a way too long title, but it gives you an idea of like the regenerative food and land management systems was really what I was zeroing in on.
Yes, great. Actually, the way you shared takes us exactly where I'm hoping to explore further in this. Like, I'm very curious to hear how has your work been received by, say, somebody working in a more mainstream uh, water infrastructure, water conservation perspective, or a forestry perspective, or a biodiversity protection. And just to give you a more insight to my what's behind the question, and then you can riff on it however you like, is like we've mechanized the world and broke it into all these parts, right? And we have all our divisions, and we work within our divisions, and they're all cascading down to these root philosophies and values, as you were speaking about, that are overdue for self-reflection. But people are all at their different stages of this reflection, and everybody's busy, and it's overwhelming, and life is, everybody wants to do good work and all the above, right? But then something like your work comes out and says, hey, this is incredibly compelling for some of our really big problems. And that's a huge invitation for a lot of people to come in and look. And so at some point, they realize, oh, wait, actually, in my worldview, there's something to reflect on. And so I wonder, kind of at that frontier in your conversations, well, does that resonate at all? Have you encountered these sort of frontiers? And where have been the openings, if you've sensed them, for those deeper conversations around values and worldview?
Yeah, I think a lot of everything is about communication, um, and how we communicate and how effectively we communicate. Um, I think the reason it looks like I wear so many hats, as a musician, as a filmmaker of sorts, as a scholar, but really when I look at all the things, the common denominator is communications, right? We're trying to communicate ideas, whether it's through a song or through a dissertation or through an essay or whatever, or a book. Um, so I think my job in this world is to be a communicator. Um, and so a lot of it depends on how you communicate, right? And one of the things that I have found helpful, I don't know, I'm still learning, but is to reassure who you're communicating with that you're on their side. Um, and you're a friend of theirs, and to mean it. That's I mean, that's the hard part, is to mean it. To say, this is who I am, and this is what I believe in. And so that disarms, right? It's a lot of the communication is about disarming. Like maybe a joke at the beginning, or maybe playfully being humble, and sort of making a joke about yourself or something, and kind of just bringing stuff back to the ground of like, hey, we're just a bunch of crazy people who are just trying to figure stuff out. Like, let's figure it out together. Be my friend. Um, so I think that's the basis of the communication is love, camaraderie, brotherhood, sisterhood. And a lot of people, they disagree with that. They say, no, screw these people. They've done terrible things. They need to be accountable. We need to put them in. We need to corner them and interrogate them, and get them to pay up. And I totally understand the rage and the anger that people feel. um, and that they want to lead with that. I totally get it. I just don't think it's effective. I don't think it's gonna work. um, but I honor the rage. I know it's real, and I know it's a feeling we can't just shove down. But instead, I have chosen, for whatever reason, to lead with fraternity, for lack of a better word, um, to lead with kinship and to lead with a sense of family to whomever I'm speaking with. And as Diné people, that's the first thing we say is Yaat Eshik eh, greetings, my kinsmen, my kinswomen, my kinspeople. Yaat eh, like hello, look where we are, where the sky and the earth meet. This is and I'm calling you. I don't say, hey Jay. I say, Yaat eh Shania, hello, my older brother. That is the proper way to address you, is through a kinship term. Um, and so I lead with that. Like, hey, look, y'all people are my family, whether you know it or not, y'all people are my family. So that dissolves the frontier, I think, considerably. And once you establish you're on their side, there's also this other phenomenon I've noticed where, maybe contrary to popular belief, most people are on the side of Indigenous peoples, at least on a ideological level. I won't say all. Clearly, I've also heard some people say some crazy stuff. Like I've heard people tell me, "I'm grateful that your people died in the genocide, because if not, we wouldn't have America. So thank you for the blood you all spilled so that we could all be." So there's some folks that are just a lost cause. They're never gonna possess the empathy required to to um to have any constructive conversation. I think that's just a fact. But I'd say the other majority are eager to figure out, how do we heal the disgusting, painful, terrible way that Native people were treated at to create this place. How are we going to do that? So I also have that on my side as a communicator, right? Like they want to. They might not always have a safe place to figure that out, or the courage to confront some of the scary stuff or whatever, but they want to. And they have no idea how. And my ancestors made it easy for me, right? My ancestors were, talk about beautiful people. I mean, even in the face of all that they experienced, they held themselves with such dignity, with such poise, with such incredible wisdom and beauty. And they held onto their hearts, and we still have our hearts intact after everything that's happened to us. 98% of us getting wiped out. So I also have that on my side as a communicator, because when people hear about Native American stuff, quote unquote, they're like, oh, intrigued, or they're like, huh, cool. I've heard about y'all, and I've heard that y'all are pretty awesome. So there's sort of that on my side as well, to communicate these things. So um all of that creates an environment and a climate in which we can start working in the soil of our belief system. Uh, I think I have a very unique positionality as a Native woman to really to earn the trust of the audiences that we speak to, and to start inserting these new ideas, to start seeding these old but new to some ways of understanding the world. Um, and so all of that is to say that I don't experience much resistance. I don't. I think, um, for better or worse, I've found a style of communication that is facilitatory of connection, of um, mutual understanding, of breaking open horizons of what we thought was possible. Um, and through that, creating alliances. You know, Now, does the head of Fish and Wildlife understand what I'm saying? Honestly, probably so. If they were to watch the TED Talk on YouTube about native land management, they'd probably be like, "Oh, holy crap, that's amazing." Um, and to speak about it backed by Western science, right? That's what these folks believe in, for better or worse. And so if you have your archaeological evidence, if you have your archival evidence, if you have your um, paleoecological evidence, then you're using their own tools to speak to them, and they appreciate it. They're like, okay, cool, that's all I needed. I just needed you to show me a fossilized pollen graph. That's all I needed. I just needed the proof. Once you give them the proof, they're like, oh, okay, this is great. So I think that we're in a space where, as Indigenous peoples, we're finally able to communicate this stuff. Because that was another issue with colonization. There was a huge language barrier, right? You can imagine, all these Europeans coming here, and like we just did not understand each other. We're just like, we didn't understand them, they didn't understand us. And so we're making all these assumptions, and there's lack of communication, and taking advantage of that too, right? Like taking advantage of the fact we couldn't speak English, and using that to just bully the crap out of us in so many ways. But now we're 500 years later. We've gotten their darn doctor degrees. We've gotten, we've understood their science. We still know our own science. And people like Robin Wall Kimmerer are writing braiding sweetgrass. People like Yvette Collin are doing this horse research. Um, People are doing collaborative archaeology with Native communities. So we're finally at a place where, like, all right, let's sit down, let's talk about this. We got it. We know how to say it. And it shows. There's incredible paradigm shifts going on because Native peoples are in a place now where we're like, okay, we know how to say what we've been trying to say for 500 years in a way that you're going to understand.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the head of Fish and Wildlife. So imagine or equivalents in other national level or large level policy or organizational structures. I wonder, do you feel like that is the most effective lever or area to focus, or is it within? I mean, if I feel like we're far from a point where I can imagine entire regions and landscapes getting off private property and coming under a collective management system, even if that is the direction and cultural conversation that should be had. In the meantime, is it a bottom up cluster of people that live in the same watershed? Is it both? Is it all fronts at the same time? Go for all the policy levels and institutional levels, and meet the wildlife management, meet the water management, meet them where they are, keep pulling them towards a common worldview, but know that it's going to be incremental baby steps? Or is it more, let's focus on this region where we have really more aligned people and community with capacity to get examples that can be bigger showcases that help inspire them to take this action? Um, that's not really a specific question. I'm just sort of reflecting on what I'm hearing. I wonder, do you think about where to put your focus, or is it more of a, this is the message for anyone and everyone, as you want to bring this knowledge to the rest of the world?
I think it's a really good question. It's the question, perhaps. Like, okay, that's very sweet, but how do we implement it? How do we operationalize this in today's world, which is where it's at, like you said? Um, a couple things come to mind. One is, yes, as people, we can band together to do bioregional things, uh, collective watershed management, um, food shed cooperatives, so collapsing our private land holdings into one pilot project, even if it's like 5 neighbors who say, hey, we live in an ecosystem, don't we? We're not on little isolated parcels of land. We're actually part of something bigger than ourselves. How do we tap into that? How do we honor what's going on around us? How do we manage it collectively? Um, that is one pilot project that I often suggest, although I know it's way easier said than done. Um, but the other thing is national park systems are sort of like a perfect place for these experiments to go on. And we just had a huge breakthrough. The 29 Palms Indigenous Nation in Southern California just recently received official co-management status of Joshua Tree National Park. And so this is very exciting. Wait, let me fact check that. Is it Joshua Tree or Mojave?
That's amazing.
Yep. Yeah, it is. Yep. Okay. So Joshua Tree National Park. So the wheels are turning, and things are changing slowly. And I think the national park system, which is now headed for the first time ever by a Native man, under the Department of the Interior, which is for the first time headed by a Native woman. Insane, I mean, it shouldn't be so insane, but it is, in a good way, insanely good. But so what we have here is the national park system, which is, hundreds and hundreds of acres of land that are now ready, if we were open to it, to at least co-management with Indigenous peoples. But I'm hoping eventually will be fully managed by Indigenous peoples, at least pilot projects. And I think pilot projects are another inroad that we can truly make at this time, inroads that are not out of reach, not pie in the sky, but pilot projects. One of the things this elder told me when I first started my research in this topic was Native people own enough land to change the way the world thinks about food and water. In other words, you don't need a lot of land to demonstrate that these principles work. You don't need a lot of land to change the way people think. Um, and so I think that that's sort of where we're at. We're at a place where we can do small projects that have a big impact, and you see that all the time, like little paradigmatic shifts that are catalyzed by little places or, and places that sort of open up our mind of what's possible. And even this Joshua Tree co-management thing, it's just one little national park in Southern California. But imagine how much that's sparking people's ideas across the country, right? Of like, maybe we could do that here. And how that first co-management experiment, if you will, is going to break the ground for so many other ones to come. So I think that's a big piece for all of us to know. So the last thing I'll say is that I'm loving this metaphor of the bird bath. The bird bath is a bath that humans create for birds. They create like a little thing and they put water in it, and the birds come and they can take a bath. So, what is that? That to me is humanity giving a gift to non humans. That is humanity for no reason. They're not getting anything out of it. Maybe they get to watch birds take a bath, but really it's to give a service, a very tiny amenity to the birds around you, which are not caged, which can come and go as they please. And that type of relation, that metaphor, I think, is the crux of what my dissertation was talking about, is how do we give services to non-humans the same way we give services to single mothers, the same way we give services to people with disabilities, the same way we give services to children, elders, you know, um, how do we create departments that are part of providing services to non-humans? That's what our truest nature is, I think, is to be allies, to be in a sense like supporters and givers to these animal plant populations. Um, and so all of us can create a bird bath. That's something we can all do. Um, and I almost want to start like a bird bath competition, like maybe it's not a bird bath, but it's some kind of service to the animals around you. Maybe you're gonna plant milkweed because so many animals love to eat milkweed, including butterflies. Maybe you're gonna plant a bunch of pollinators in your front yard and just having this competition of like, what kind of innovative, sweet gift can you give to the non-humans around you? Um, and that's something we can all do. And I think even just doing a bird bath or even having a bird bath competition, it's starting to seed consciousness of like, maybe we can give a gift to the non-human world, like giving a flower, to someone for no reason, just to say I love you, you know. I think that's what the earth deserves right now, is just more flowers at her doorstep. And so uh, that's something we can all do too. But yeah, in terms of where I'm focusing my energies, I think just I don't have a. I mean, that's the thing about YouTube, right? There is no part. Anyone can access it, right? And so it's been very joyful for me and very interesting to me to see who's been watching it. And it's not always who you think it would be. It's folks who don't have any prior interest in this stuff are like it's coming across their desk magically, thank goodness, and they're being influenced by it, and it's gonna activate their behavior in a certain direction.
That's great to hear that it's reaching so many people, and I just love the bird bath example and idea of spreading. It's such a good example of this invitation to fall in love with the joy of life and the beauty of life, and to give back and to feel it. And I think in my own relation to these themes and our challenges, I have so much more faith in the example that is just more attractive, the context that is naturally inviting, that will pull people in instead of push them out. And I think this is kind of got its fractal layers to it. And as we think about land management and food systems, and there's the notion of stewardship, to give it a concrete example, that I think, depending on how you define it, if you have a more traditional sustainability perspective of stewardship, I feel like we are definitely not there, but that may be our next base that we land in, and sort of like collective consciousness. But that won't necessarily bring with it the bird bath, and in terms of relation of how we relate to what we are stewarding. And so there's a question in me of how far is far enough? Where are we in the world right now in all this crazy complexity and fragilities that we're facing with ecological, climate, planetary boundaries, geopolitical, I mean, it's incredibly fragile. And so there's this tendency to go towards quick linear solutions when really it feels we need to slow down a lot. And at the same time, a huge amount of discernment for how far is far enough. I don't know if that made sense, but I wonder if it did, if you could talk about how you relate to this question of how far is far enough for what's next from today.
Yeah, I mean, another thing I was going to say on the last question is that um, maybe this is too pessimistic of a view, but I'm not sure if humanity will change to the extent that it needs to without some major catastrophes um, to push them in that direction. let's take, for example, the climate crisis, as some people call it. You have people been telling us for decades, there's a cliff right there. Don't keep driving. We're going to go off the edge of the cliff. Since the 80s, right? People have been very clear about how this is going to lead to this. And in the past 30, 40 years, as we've known, have we changed? No, not at all. And so, okay, I guess we've changed a little bit, you know, but by and large, not far enough, as you say, anywhere near the amount of methane and CO2 and blah blah blah. You know, the emissions that are going out are not decreasing. The not even the rate in which we emit it is decreasing. You know what I'm saying? Are we trying to? Are we making efforts? Yes. Certain sectors of society are trying with all their might. Are we as a species doing what is rational? No, we are not. So, point being, you can show people all the graphs in the world, all the scary statistics in the world, but I think possibly until we really feel on a personal level the consequences of our actions, which we are starting to, and oftentimes, sadly, the most marginalized peoples feel it first. Only then are we going to really wake up. Like, for example, COVID, right? It hit people right in the wallet. You know, some people made money, but a lot of people lost money. It forced people to change their entire life, you know, and it's those things I think we learn from the most, is the things that really knock us out of our norm, interrupt our business as usual. So I don't know if this is true or if I'm being too pessimistic, but I almost feel like these catastrophes we're about to experience in the next 100 years, they are our gift. They are our wake the heck up, you know, they are our slap in the face. They are our wake up call. And it's going to be hurtful. It's going to be painful. There's going to be suffering. But apparently, that's the only thing that's going to wake us up, because we've known for almost 40 years exactly what was going to happen. Indigenous people have been telling people for hundreds, thousands of years, different parts of the world have been telling people, like, this is not going to work. This hierarchical model, this masculine insecurity expressing itself as domination is not going to work. None of that's going to work. But until we really feel why it won't work, I'm not sure if we're going to change fast enough or far enough. I hope I'm wrong. I hope people will decide they want to change stuff before it all, you know, goes to pieces. But I think our civilization, our human machine, is going to have to experience a profound hit a wall before we're going to stop doing what we're doing. And it's happened before. That's maybe the good news, is human civilizations have collapsed before, and they have learned from it. They have learned from their own arrogance. They have learned from their own mistakes. Arguably, parts of Europe, you know, World War II just rocked them to their core, you know, in the most terrible way you could imagine. Just and now clearly war hasn't ended, but there's a pretty almost institutionalized notion that, like, world wars are not good. You know? We want to avoid that. Of course, they are still exploiting all kinds of places all over the world, and the war is anything but ended. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm just saying people did learn from that. They learned the horror of war in a very big way. So anyways, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of some of my thinking, is that I don't think we're going to go far enough to avert major catastrophe. I don't think we're, if the past few decades is any indication, I don't think we have the foresight or the energy or the desire to go far enough fast enough.
Well, what I'm feeling right now listening to what I want to share maybe would be just even more depressing or give a little line of hope or joy is that I see I see us hitting multiple repeating walls, and the likelihood of one massive climactic one being less probable, and that at each one of those it's going to be a moment of double down on old patterns or embrace some level of what's been growing at the periphery. And that for the most people, like we were talking about earlier, are open to individually, philosophically, but all of the layers of norms within how society works isn't built for embodying those values. And so, how we can build out and create these, weave the catchment for new systems so that it's not just repeating the cycle again. I think that's how I see my own work and the work of the next few generations is do our damn best to create as much opportunity to build upon in a better direction as these things hit their walls and begin to compost themselves or prove insufficient. Um, but I have a fear associated to that of this sort of vacuum of ideology, and this is where I think the or vacuum of worldview, this double down notion, and being a communicator, working on sharing these values, these stories. How have you reflected on the overall narrative structure in the culture, and particularly the hero's journey as this kind of like persistent frame, and that it's an individual story to a large degree, and there's a solution, there's kind of like a win, right? And in my own journey and relating to these problems, I'm feeling more and more like it's not a problem with a solution. It's a predicament with a set of potential actions, and we're moving into a complex system, and we hope to contribute towards a better direction, towards a living system's embodied worldview and culture. But it's going to be messy, and we're just going to keep reassessing. And so it really doesn't seem like a good fit for that storytelling framework. How have you thought about the narratives and the way in which we can bring some of the values that can serve us going forward into the future?
Well, let me ask you this. How do you think Indigenous worldviews were born? Um, from what I understand, they were not born of already being enlightened. They were born from catastrophe. They were born from war. Um, the Haudenosaunee people of the Northeast that we admire, that created, you know, or rather heavily influenced our notion of democracy, right? That the founding fathers came here and saw the way the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy was operating, and saw, wow, what if we didn't have monarch, you know? And how many people know that America, as we know it, this government system of the people governing themselves, is an indigenous ideology that they copied. They didn't have any blueprint for that. They needed to see us doing it. So, point being, that Haudenosaunee Confederacy, they have a prophet called the Peacemaker who came, and they have this great law of peace, and it's very sophisticated. Um, they're led by their clan grandmothers, very sophisticated society. But why did the Peacemaker need to come? You know, because there was so much war. And so my point is that these worldviews, these native worldviews that we know and love, that are what we feel like we need, they didn't come from people already knowing what to do. They came precisely from people who were lost and who felt the pain of being lost and were forced to create an alternative worldview if they were going to survive. Um, in other words, trial and error, you know, that's how these things are created. And so, and my point is, I think all of humanity is capable, I would hope so, is capable of inventing, amending, transforming worldviews that can help our society be healthy. And it's through the war, through the destruction of our food system, through the chaos that we're experiencing now, that we are being propelled towards something that works. And a lot of people say, what is Indigenous science founded on? You always hear this. They say it's founded on millennia of observation, millennia of trial and error, millennia of screwing up, and realizing, oh, that doesn't work. Learning, trial and erudition, as my elder says, Filmer Bluehouse. So it's through this healing, it's through this catastrophe that I think we're capable. So I don't think there's going to be I do believe what you're saying, the double down thing, right? But the double down thing only works for so long. It's sort of like an addict, right? Like they just keep burrowing themselves down and they keep trying to do whatever little things they can do to keep their lifestyle going until they hit rock bottom, right? Rock bottom is where you have nowhere left to run. You are stuck. And the only way out is to confront yourself. And as a former addict, that's what I had to do. You know, I was 20 years old when I hit rock bottom in a very big way, and I had to get sober. I started doing drugs when I was 11. So I think we're really similar to that addict. You know, we're addicted to oil, we're addicted to fame, we're addicted to money, we're addicted to our insecurities, or rather soothing our insecurities, being complacent of not dealing with our insecurities. We're addicted to all of that. And so you can only do that for so long until you hit rock bottom. And I think when we do hit rock bottom, we are going to be forced to invent these new worldviews. So I don't think there may be a vacuum, although obviously indigenous cultures can help support that. But that vacuum can always be filled through the innovative qualities that our species possesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm just looking at the clock here, so I'll ask the final question following up on this notion. Um, Imagine you were called upon to speak to future generations and help craft the outline of a general education. Feel free to rename that if you like, but about the values to lean into what you're going to need to face what's coming. We're facing this confrontation and sort of hyperclimactic moment of clashing of worldviews. While we need to rebuild our systems that are spackled with good intentions and conflicting views. What is the foundation? What are parts of the foundation that you would offer as good places to build up our education?
Well, maybe this sounds cliche, but love, you know, compassion, that is the ultimate North Star, you know, compassion. There was an elder who was giving a teaching, and all these people came to receive the teaching. And this young man even brought his notebook and his pen and paper, and the elder said, "Okay, you ready?" It was his turn to talk to the elder. And he was like, "Yeah, you know, I'm ready." And he said, "Okay, ready? I'm going to give you the secret to the universe." You know, kind of was the vibe everyone had. And he said, "Okay, write this down. Love, yes, love is the answer period, you know, but that's the answer. And I know people disagree with me on that. I'm like, oh, you and your love stuff, Lyla, got you stop using the kid gloves all the time. But I think holding each other accountable is love, and you can do it lovingly. Um, Being there for someone who doesn't deserve it is love, and that love can transform things. Love can change the world. And compassion, if it is the root of our systems, we cannot fail, like Lauren Hill says, to make a better situation. If we love ourselves, we cannot fail to make a better situation. And so I think that it's beautifully simple, actually. Um, but then the implementation of it can be a little bit uh, complicated, right? How do you love yourself after you've been raped? How do you love yourself after you watch your dad beat up your mom? How do you love yourself after you know, done so much drugs and maybe stolen things? Um, that's a little more complicated, but to know that that's the goal, is to love yourself unconditionally, to love others unconditionally through all of our antics and shenanigans, like that's a good start. But if you're talking about a general curriculum, a general education, as if I'm one to say, I'm such a baby in all of this, but I would say, uh, to be good to women, to be good to children, to be good to elders, to make spaces for men to cry, uh, or feel whatever they're feeling in a safe and non-judgmental place. Men need more spaces to feel desperately. Um, to care for non-humans, you know, our soul is elevated. I really believe that's one of the things that elevates our souls. We care for animals and plants, things outside of our own species. Um, that those are the core things, honor two-spirit relatives who, don't judge them, to be kind to them. Uh, another big thing within Native culture is to honor those with disabilities, which funnily enough is actually most of us, you know. It might not be visible disability, but the disability community is large, and they deserve our support. Um, Everything from me, who has a hard time reading, I needed the accessibility features on my computer to finish my dissertation, and thank goodness that they had those. Um, to be able to get the words to speak to me off the page, to highlight it and it'll speak it to me. I can hear stuff. I just can't read stuff in big chunks at a time. My brain doesn't process information that way. So those would be the core curriculum, like to be good to children, to be good to elders, to be good to those with disabilities, to be good to those who are less fortunate, simple stuff, to be good to animals and plants, you know, get back to the basics. And people might say, oh, that's so stupidly simple, Lyla. Okay, well, why are all of our elders in nursing homes? If it's so simple, it's so easy, why are they not a priority? Um, if children are so important, why are teachers paid so poorly? You know, um, this would be the basics that we apparently, even though we can send, whoever to space and have telescopes that can see the farthest star, we can't seem to see the people right in front of us. And even though we have these incredible technologies, we can't seem to figure out the most basic thing of paying a teacher, properly. Um, so I think these are the things we're going to have to get good at, and these are the teachings we're going to have to put at the core of our society. And I think we can. And I'm excited to, if nothing else, go down swinging. Give it our best shot.
Those are wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, maybe simple, but far, far from easy. And what was echoing in me is this hurt people. And once you other something and separate from something, you just keep separating. But once you begin to connect, then you're inspired to connect more. And I was just having a conversation the other day about diet, and I was vegan for some time, and anyway, describing that transition really wasn't hard past the first couple weeks, because then it's just what your body wants. I don't prescribe any specific diet for anybody, but it's just to say that the subconscious, the habitual patterns that we have. I mean, if we all got into a rhythm of love and unconditional caring and compassion, it probably wouldn't take too long to start shifting.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate being here. Thanks for having me. And
Thank you so
thank you all
much.
for your time. Hope it was helpful and have a beautiful day and we'll be in touch.
Do you want to share any particular place? I'll put a couple links to some of your talks in your website, but is there any particular place people should look for you?
Um, for better or worse, I'm just all over the internet. Uh, um, I don't know, maybe I'm sure I've said some stupid things somewhere on the internet, but lylajune.com might be a good place to start. LYLAJUNE.com. A book of poetry published called Lifting Hearts Off the Ground. You want to buy it from Common Word Publishing. All proceeds go to native led projects. So yeah, those are some places to start.
Okay, great. Lyla, thank you so much. And I wish
Thank
you
you.
unconditional love and energy on all of your work, and am inspired to know more about everything you've been up to.
Thank you, dear. Have a great day and we'll be in touch.
You too.